Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today in the show, we talk about, one of maybe the hardest connecting practices to get started for some people, but one of, again, the most imperative practices of connected relationships, which is repair, reflect, and readjust. And so we'll talk about this in pretty good depth during the actual episode, but rather than this being a lesson on apologizing, and here's how to apologize, we're going to talk pretty in depth about what this actually looks like, the modeling aspects of it for our kids, the aspects of healthy relationship building, how to actually do this. But we're going to talk about all that in pretty good depth with one of our favorite people, Anteelah Love, who is a Cultivate Connection facilitator and also a staff person with one of our programs at Empowered to Connect, which is called Safe and Secure Tennessee. She does some work with Memphis Family Connection Center as well, and at an elementary school. She's a woman of many talents. And so Anteelah has been with us multiple times before. You got to hear her on, but this is her first time as part of the team. And so we're excited to have her on today. Becca McKay is also joining us, and just a really great practical conversation. So here we are now talking about repair, reflect, and readjusting. It is Becca, Anteelah, and I. Here we are. Well, okay, as we talked about earlier, we're here with Anteelah Love and with Becca McKay. And Anteelah is a recurring guest, so most of you probably know her and her story and her family story. You've heard her with her husband Matthew before on with us. And now, I guess let's start with this, Anteelah. Before we jump into the conversation, why don't you, for people who don't know you or are not familiar with you, why don't you share a little about yourself, what you do, and then how you guys got connected to ETC in the beginning?
Yes. Hey, I'm glad to be back. We got connected with ETC probably 2017, 2018. After some things in our home just weren't working with raising two small girls, ages 3 and 5. And I also was pregnant, so it was just a lot going on. So that's kind of our story of just, and also we lived close to Montana, so we were just getting all the goods all the time and realized that we just needed to, dip our toes in just a little bit. Yeah. I work at an elementary school part-time, and I also am part-time at MFCC as of last week. So I'll be working a little bit with Becca and then with Safe and Secure with Rachel. So excited about that.
Awesome. And you're hearing different names and abbreviations. So if you're just tuning in for the first time, MFCC is the Memphis Family Connection Center, which is one of our programs, one of Empowered to Connect's programs, which is a holistic integrated family mental health clinic here in Memphis, Tennessee. And then Safe and Secure Tennessee is an ambassador org of the Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development. And we do organizational trainings across the state of Tennessee for schools, organizations, families, not families, just kidding. Schools, organizations, nonprofits, systems, you name it. So that's that. So Anteelah has a very full plate, as well as having 3 kids. So, Anteelah, we're going to talk today about repair, which we were joking about before we came on is easy for all of us to talk about because there's lots of it happening and needing to happen. So before we do that, Becca, will you just kind of give us kind of the overview of this connecting practice as it's laid out in Cultivate Connection?
Absolutely. So the connecting practice is repair, reflect, readjust. It's our first ever 3-in-1. So we always have 3 core components, but in this one, they really are 3 different things. So first, we want to repair after a rupture. So we define a rupture as like a break in relationship. And as the adult in the relationship with the kids in our home or in our school or in our childcare setting or however we're interacting with them, we want to take ownership of initiating repair after relational ruptures. Then we want to reflect after an interaction. And there's like a million, there's a lot to that. You could reflect in so many different ways. And we hope that people will remember one of our first connecting practices of being curious as they reflect. But really here, after something happens, after an interaction, we really want to think about what was going on with the kiddo, what was going on with us or the adult in the situation, and then what was going on in the environment around us. Like where were we? Who was there? What were the demands being placed on the kid? And if we skip this step, it's really going to set us up to have a similar rupture in the future. So we want to reflect so that we can readjust either our expectations or our supports. Maybe we are putting kids in situations that are just not fair for them, like going straight from school to soccer practice to grandma's house. Like maybe that's too many demands on the kiddo. So we need to readjust our expectations, or maybe we need to readjust our supports. Maybe it's okay for us to have a busy schedule, but we are constantly checking in. We've got some plans in place. We've got some proactive stuff that we're doing with our kids to help them. I know it's a lot to unpack because it's a lot. We won't go super deep into each one of those core components on today's conversation, but it's just kind of this whole idea, the picture of it is like the little settings gear on your phone or your laptop. And it's just that idea of like fine tuning. So stuff's going to happen. It just is in relationships. Human relationships are messy. And so the little gear reminds us like, okay, let's make some tweaks. Let's make some adjustments. Let's be thoughtful and let's take ownership for repairing.
Yeah. Anteelah, in light of that, kind of what's your favorite thing about this connecting practice?
I don't know if this would be my favorite, but one that I have to do often is repair. Because, it's all about just owning our mistakes, seeking that forgiveness, modeling what it looks like to apologize to one another.
Yeah.
And I've just seen that it has really transformed just even like for a couple of my kids, just not really wanting to apologize, and don't think that they're ever in the wrong. But me modeling, like if I said something, hey, I'm really sorry I said that. I should not have said that. They are now coming to me like, you know what I said yesterday? I'm really sorry I said that. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like there's an apology unprompted. This is awesome. I'm not saying that it happens every time. But it's just more thoughtful apologies are happening now and not just like, well, mom says I have to say sorry. So sorry. So I try to kind of leave that open. Like, how would you like to make it better? So that they're able to think, whatever person they're needing to make it better with, what they kind of enjoy and like and do and that sort of thing to be able to really repair the way that they see fit and not because I said you need to apologize.
Yeah, I think it's funny that we get in this mode of like the criticism of this particular connecting practice is usually just a giant eye roll at the thought of parents apologizing. I mean, like, what are you're like setting your kids up to think they run the house. And I love you mentioned modeling because it's 100% the opposite, right? Like you are setting your kids up to understand how to run a house. And that means that you are owning your mistakes, that you are coming and owning your part of a rupture. Because if a blow up happened 9 times out of 10, 2 people were at play in that rupture, right? There might have been one most egregious act, but like most likely there was stuff, festering on both sides that led to that. And so to model owning that in the process of apologizing and even modeling how to apologize is so helpful. Now, at some point, I would love for it to flip where our kids started modeling that for their younger siblings, and it didn't have to be us modeling all the time, and it will at some point. But what we're doing is showing them what a healthy relationship looks like. And I think that's why the reflect piece is so important because one kind of, I would say, like, if you're thinking of becoming a person like school, one like master's level skill as an adult is figuring out environmental circumstances that could be causing a meltdown in yourself or in your kids. And so like being able to stop and think further than, well, he can't talk to me that way. Like he popped off and that's why, he got in trouble and he can't talk to me that way. And he didn't learn that. Like, instead of just that, it's like thinking the 5 steps back as that pot began to boil, like what was creating that setting. And we've had times before as a family where like we've been stumped about, why does this keep causing meltdowns? And you realize it's something with a vent fan that's too loud, or lights are too bright in the setting, or there's too much noise from other people in the room. And so that's causing a low underlying buzz of stress behind. So then the trigger to actually melt down is much quicker to pull. And so I think for us, that's been one of the most helpful things, is like learning how to see behind just that immediate behavior and how to like detective work your way back into seeing what could have happened. So I love that you mentioned that.
I think too, it's just that both of y'all have said like the reminder that it starts with us. Like I think both of you have kind of mentioned different aspects of that. And, we all have the same goal, like adults in general who care about kids, who are like positive adults, whether they are parenting or caregiving from like a super punitive and shame-based method, or whether they're using more attachment-based principles, we want the same thing. We want kids who can express their emotions appropriately. We want kids who can say sorry after they've hurt someone. We want kids who can change their behavior at times and be, we want them to be healthy adults. And I think so many times we forget that like it starts with us. So I think what I love about this connecting practice is it really reminds me of my role in it is not necessarily to fix the kid or even my own behavior right away, but my role is this kind of like, what do I need to tweak here? Like, what do I need to adjust?
Yeah.
What do I need to do? And how do I show them the repair piece? For me, what I love about it is it takes off the pressure. Like anything can happen between me and a kid. The blow up can be bad. It can be really, really bad. And I can find a way to offer my presence to that kid again and start fresh. And I can do that because of my own like mental boundaries, because of my own emotional boundaries, like because of the work I've done internally. I don't know. It's probably like going too deep into the like counselor social work mindset there, but I just love that both of y'all talked about that because I think it's so true. And in the day-to-day busyness, this step we often can just skip because it takes time after the fact. And once something's over, like we just want to keep it moving. Like we want to move on to the next, like, okay, that happened with brother and now sister's crying. Like, okay, I'm done with that. And so when we can, not perfectly, not every time, but when we can repair, reflect, and readjust, it really just helps everybody, I think, function better.
One more thing on that, Becca, too. Like the idea of readjusting takes the pressure off. And I'm thinking for myself, as somebody who like, if I make a mistake or I cause a rupture in a relationship, like I'm going to beat myself up worse than anybody can ever shame me for the hurt that I've caused. So the readjust piece reminds me that like, it's that I'm not over, like I am not that rupture. Like I am not a constant source of pain for people around me, but I am in process too. And when I make a mistake, there's a readjusting so that I get a little bit better at that skill. I have another practice of being humbled and then being reminded of why it's important to do X, Y, or Z thing. And then I'm reminded that like there's other factors besides just my involvement in it. So if you are somebody who suffers from that kind of shame-based place of repair where you're like, I don't know if I can do this again because I just can't keep apologizing. You have to remember that like that's for life. Like we're apologizing for life because we are not perfect. And if we're not perfect and we're not going to achieve perfection while we're here living, then we're going to repair our whole life. And so it's less of a, I don't like thinking of it as a rupture, like a break necessarily, as much as it is like a malfunction, right? So like there's like an oil change needed, or there's a brake pad needing to be changed out. Like instead of it being like, well, she's totaled, like, and so I think that gives me hope to remember I can just make something messed up instead of like, oh, how do I do that again? I'm the worst. It's like, man, what the heck caused that? Oh, well, I was this, and this, and I didn't have breakfast either. And that's probably why so when you get curious about yourself too, you realize it's malfunctions, not breaks. Like you're not broken. Your kid's not broken. There's just these malfunctioning parts in relationship that we have to tune up. And, in a lot of ways, you don't know that until you see it happen. Right. So, So there's hope if you are one who drowns in shame. Yeah, we definitely said that way deeper than that.
No, we went so deep.
All right. What are some common, we've mentioned some of this, but Anteelah, some common like missteps or mistakes or misconceptions that you hear when you're talking about this particular connecting practice?
A big one is I don't need to apologize to my child. I'm in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
period.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, you know what? Some days I feel that.
Yeah.
100%. However, and then another one is just like, you know, having unrealistic expectations for your child. And this is where I have to really be mindful. And I guess we can talk about this a little later with how I'm planning to use it, but just being mindful of parenting the child in front of you, and not comparing, not, you know, parenting for the future and all the worries and things that come with tomorrow. So I think that a common mistake or misstep is that they should kind of bend to our expectations, again, because we're in charge. We pay the bills, we do all the things, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pressure to hold too. Like if you have that mindset, it's a lot of pressure of like, well, I said it, so it should happen. And so when it doesn't, what does that say about me? What does that say about us? Like it's a lot of pressure to hold whenever you do have that mindset, but it's super common. Like you said, like, yeah, you don't pay the bills around here. I think too, whenever people start to try to reflect, a common misstep is they like, I mean, maybe I'm only speaking to like overthinkers unite, which is me, but I think sometimes with the reflect piece, a misstep is if there is something that goes wrong, just really, like you said, JD, the shame and the blame and, well, I should have, oh, well, I did, well, I didn't know. And so I also think like a misstep is thinking that we can outthink the problem. Like life is messy. People are messy. Don't we all make mistakes? And so why do we try so hard to not? Like we try so hard sometimes to like make everything perfect, almost to the point of like walking on eggshells around every single situation.
Yeah.
And so I think one misstep is thinking, well, if I reflect appropriately, there will be no more blow-ups. There will be no more meltdowns. There will be no more problems.
Yeah.
Versus just this mindset of like, no, like the gear never leaves. Like we're always tweaking the gear, because think about like the brightness on your computer screen. We're in an office right now with like light streaming in, and my computer has this like auto brightness setting and it's constantly shifting, trying to like be the right amount of light. That's more what this is like in real life. It's not like the correct setting is 7 out of 10 brightness. Like, no, the correct setting depends on if I'm at home in a dark room in the winter time or like in this bright office. So I think that's a misstep that I feel like, at least maybe I'm the only Overthinkers Anonymous unite. Like at least I get into this like shame of, oh, I should have known better, instead of seeing it as like, no, 7 out of 10 brightness worked yesterday in this context, and today it needs to be 4 out of 10 brightness. If that, I mean, I know I'm using an analogy, but
that was a great analogy. I'm like, yes, I'm writing that down.
Seriously. Well, and I think Anteel, what you mentioned, just think about the two of what the two of you mentioned. Again, going back to like, it's if we get caught thinking down here, we're listening to a podcast. If you get caught thinking at like a too basic of a level, like a ground level way of thinking, and someone tells you, hey, if you have a rupture with your kid, you need to go apologize. Nothing can more quickly revert you to a childlike mindset than that sentence, because what immediately wells up? He does. It's his fault. Like, and so if we get stuck thinking that we need to do this because it's a matter of justice, then you're going to have a very, very hard time, because you're only going to be willing to apologize when you, in your own mind, committed the more egregious of the two errors in the relationship. If we remember that it's a teaching mechanism and that you're modeling as you do this, it can keep you from overthinking. And it can also, like, because again, the overthinking turns into, oh yeah, I need to model. I'm not perfect. I'm taking the pressure off myself. You're not perfect. You're taking the pressure off of them. Hey, neither of us are perfect. In a situation, I think here's what happened. I messed up. You messed up. Here's where I shouldn't have done this. And I'm going to work to try not to do this again, or I'm going to, do this or this to try to, make an effort to be better in that area. But I wanted you to know, I'm sorry, that was not the right, because that's the meat of it. Like, that's the real deal. Like, what you're trying to get to is, hey, I want you to know, I recognize that what I did hurt you, and I really don't want to hurt you. I love you. I'm showing you, I see that's wrong. I'm going to work to not do that again or hurt you in that way. But I really feel sad about the way that I caused you to feel. And then hopefully there is, over time, a transition of initiation to where over time, your kid's apologizing first sometimes, you're apologizing first sometimes, and you're showing them maturity in relationship, and they can walk out of your house ready to be the initiator in repair because they've seen it modeled so well that it's become part of who they are.
Also, I do want to push a little bit because I think a common misconception is that repair is only the apology part. And so, yes, to everything you said. And sometimes there is nothing that you can apologize. Like, sometimes there is a situation and repair just means, okay, instead of coming at this kid with like, well, are you ready to act right? Instead of coming with that energy, I'm going to decide it happened. The relationship is more important to me than the situation. And so I'm still going to be playful with them at dinner time, even though we had this big blow up. So yes, to everything you said about modeling and all of those things. And sometimes repair just means being open to like a fresh start. And that takes a lot of internal work because we're not always we don't always feel like, hey, I want to sit next to you at dinner and call you the silly nickname. Like, sometimes we're like, I do want you to care about what you did to me and hurt my feelings. And so it's just that idea of like, okay, again, not perfectly, but like when possible, are we trying to have that mindset of like repairing the relationship? Like, the relationship is more important to me than that situation. I don't know. Anteelah, what do you think about any of those ideas that we just kind of chatted through?
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because that is one thing I think about repair is always like apologizing, but sometimes it is just getting back to that playful engagement, getting back to homeostasis or whatever you want to say, just like the normal flow of your home and how it operates. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. How are you guys, how are the Loves using this connecting practice in your house this summer? Like, kind of in this, if you're listening to this when we record it, we're about to transition kind of out of summer into kind of back to school time, which has its own unique challenges, obviously. How are you guys planning to use this during this time?
Yeah, for the moment of like readjusting, that's kind of living right now. Because, we are getting back to school. We will have new schedules, all of the things. We have, one child starting middle school, bless.
Oh my goodness.
So we're just heavy in the transitions and expectations and all of the things. So I have really been kind of digging in. I'm going to, shamelessly plug Equip Parent Coaching and Cultivate Connection. But part of the Reflect, Readjust is talking about the connected parenting journey. So I'm living a lot in like my desired outcome. That's kind of where I parent is like, if I know something's going to happen at this party, you're just not going to go. Instead of like teaching my kids how to navigate hard things, or, it doesn't have to be a party, but just in those moments where I'm parenting for fear of the future, I miss who they are right now in this moment. So I am always like parenting 18, 23, 25-year-olds where it's like, no, they're 5, 10, and 12.
Yeah.
Like, how can I adjust my expectations, really kind of lean into that expectation gap to make sure that my fear is not coming out in this parenting moment. Understanding that they have, their own influences, they have their own friend groups, they have their own, they come as their whole selves to any relationships. And so I'm like taking a deep breath because I know new challenges are coming, especially with middle school, and just having to navigate that. So I really want to, again, like going through that grief process, the whole thing, I'm like heavy in it right now, because I do want to be present and I do want to be connected. I am trying my best not to like disengage with things that I don't want to handle or deal with right now. So yeah, I feel like I rambled a little bit, but that's kind of where I am right now.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's like that parenting from fear piece is so much easier. It's so much easier just be like, getting in a car with another teenager. No, never. You won't. Like, you will only ride with certified adults. It's because there's this, like, at heart, a good desire to protect your kids and take care of them. And you love them and don't want stuff to happen. But then you and I will go get in the car and go drive somewhere. And so, like, we're putting ourselves in the same risk. So I think the reminder is like to parent where they're at. And I'm so glad you said that. Like, it takes more work because you have to be present and you got to kind of be aware of where your kids' skill levels at. Like, and they might be beyond or below their years, so to speak, of ability. And so it's not just well, you're not this age yet, you can't do, like, you got to think about ability and where they're at, and kind of using that scaffolding to like help them get to the point where they can do those different things. And so it is much harder, but like, I think you're right. Like, it's the way to go. Especially in this season of like, we're in a similar season of like elementary and middle school sort of stuff. And it is, it's lots of transition, like over and over again. And I'll think I have a grip on how to handle X, Y, or Z thing. And then something will shift and we're in we got to figure out a new tactic, So
it's so good to think about. You said I spend a lot of time parenting 18 and 25-year-olds. Like, there is so much fear of like, well, what are you going to be like as an adult? Like, am I going to be able to trust you at college? Like, all those things. That's so real. And I think that is like the ever-present inner dialogue of adults is like, okay, are they going to be okay as adults? And so just remembering that, like, this way of interacting with them that takes into account who they are and what they need and all those things is going to prepare them for adulthood, whether that adulthood looks the way that I hope that it does or doesn't.
Yeah,
I still get to be a figure in their life if I commit to this way, to this present connection-based attachment, all those, all the big things that we love to talk about. So I think that really hit me though, because I was like, oh man, like, mentally, am I engaging with this 12-year-old as a 12-year-old, or am I putting 25-year-old expectations on them?
Yes.
But sometimes we put higher expectations on kids than our own selves.
Oh my gosh. So much so. Yeah.
So I think that was a good reminder. Go ahead.
No, I was saying 100%. And I think, just like, to be honest, like, culturally raising Black children, that's even more like, oh, for the love, like, we just have so many other things to worry about.
Yeah.
And so I just feel like, I don't know, just in that fear of like, them getting older, and then obviously middle school's coming. They're not, the little 3, 5, 6-year-olds. They're like about to be teenagers, and teenagers are treated differently. Our 5-year-old is a cute little 5-year-old, but in a couple years, he may or may not be seen as aggressive or whatever, the hypersexualization of Black girls. So it's like all these things where I'm just like, okay, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Moment. They're 5, 10, and 12, Let me figure out how I can parent them now. Obviously, I want to set them up for success and a little more common sense and things like that. But that will take time.
I was gonna say that plays into how you readjust, right? Like that, like you have like additional layers to think through that not everybody does because of their context. Like, and so I think that, there's an element of that in our house too, that our, sweet, cute, short, oldest child is now like towering over me and is a giant. He's 13. So like, and he's Black. And so like, he will not always fit the description of a safe person to everybody who he's around. And that's wrong. But if we don't prepare him for that reality, then that's not fair. So we're going a different direction in this podcast now. So I'm gonna steer us back in because it's a whole that's probably a 3-hour longer discussion every week for the next 10 years. But yeah, I do think that's part. I mean, that's part of it. That's part of the factors that go into the readjusting and the reflecting, right? Okay, we're just gonna go back to lighthearted. What is your favorite example of this connecting practice in a movie, book, or TV show?
Most recently I watched Elemental. And I think that it was a great example of one, a daughter repairing with her father, of some things, like he had expectations for her and she just was like, this is not who I want to be. And then of course she's fire, falls in love with water, and they're trying to figure out how to make it work. So then everybody kind of has to readjust and realize that it's okay for them to love each other. You don't have to just stick with your people, essentially. So everybody was kind of readjusting once they kind of fell in love, and the story. But that was a really good movie for us to watch with our kids. So yeah.
Awesome.
That's a great one. I was sitting and thinking about this for a long time, and I think I already have used a lot of my books and TV show examples throughout this series. But I think about most stories have a conflict. That's kind of the point. And there's think about every rom-com. At some point, she gets mad at the businessman from the big city and it's not going to go okay. And then she readjusts her life expectations and finds love in the small town. But it is kind of a funny, I know it's a stereotype and it's a whatever, but I think about that idea of repair, reflect, readjust, after those major conflicts and kind of any big storyline, whether it's fantasy, whether it's rom-com, whether it's whatever adventure, there's some kind of conflict, and the person either resolves the conflict with that person or has to go a different way, has to adjust their expectations and go a different way.
I've talked about this show before during this series, but it's a different story, different example. But there's a TV show called Primo. You should watch it. It's really, really awesome. It's about a family or a single mom and her son. They are Mexican in San Antonio with 5 uncles that live in and out of the house. That's kind of the premise of the show. And so tons of family interactions, tons of uncle interactions. And one of the best pictures of this in particular is they're all giving him relationship advice, and he's trying to figure out how to ask a girl out, and they're all telling him different pieces of advice. And the short of it is he and then his mom reinforces he's got to go his own way. You guys have to move into an advisory role. You are not here to tell him how to do things. He's going to do things his own way. And so they move into sort of just offering help and being there to sort of help with things here or there as they're asked for it. And it's a really cool picture of some of those transitions happen in life. And we do, I mean, as parents, especially, we go from having to get our kids dressed physically because they can't do it on their own, to then letting them get dressed, making their clothes choices for them, to letting them begin to make theirs. And so it's a good picture of just that, readjusting specifically, because it shows that transition of them beginning to move into an advisory role instead of just this no, Primo, here's what you need to do. And so it's really good. The show's called Primo. It's on Amazon Prime. And you should definitely watch it. I don't know. Any other thoughts? You'll have last thoughts before we get off this topic?
One day at a time.
One day at a time.
Amen.
Yeah. Yeah. Just keep going. I think that's it. Yeah. Just don't give up. As long as you get up and try again, that's it. So yeah. Well, guys, thank y'all. This was great. Well, again, I think something to remember as we leave this conversation is that you are not broken. Your child is not broken. Something's just malfunctioned in the relationship. And this is a great moment for us to reframe and remind ourselves that when we have ruptures, when we have these different episodes that come up between us relationally, this could be with your kids, with your spouse, with your aunt, uncle, mom, dad, whatever, with a friend. When these things come up, it is so very often not just that moment that caused whatever that rupture was. And so we want to always take these thoughts into consideration in those situations as well. Repairing the rupture, then reflecting on what caused it, and then readjusting to ensure less ruptures in the future. So I hope that was helpful for you. It definitely was for me. So if nobody else got anything out of it, I sure did. So that's all we got for today. We'll be back next week with, I believe, one of our last Connecting Practice episodes for the summer, and we're gearing up for a great fall. We'll have tons of new content coming for you as well. Really excited about that. For everybody here at Empowered to Connect, for Kyle Wright, who edits and engineers all of our audio, for Tad Jewett, the creator of the music behind the Empowered to Connect podcast, and everybody here at Empowered to Connect, I'm JD Wilson, and we will see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.